Manchester, one of England's most famous cities. It's located in the northwest of England. It holds strategic importance as a major economic and cultural hub in the UK. First, the name Manchester comes from both Old English and Latin. It originates from the combination of the Roman word Mamucium, meaning fortress, and the Old English term Chester, referring to a settlement or a fort. And that's where the history of the city starts. The Roman fort of Mamucium was established near the Medlock and the Aral rivers in 79 AD, providing defensive position against Celtic tribes and for facilitating trade and communication routes. The fort was rebuilt in about 200 AD, and after that, a settlement grew around the fort. However, in the year 407 AD, the Roman army left Britain, and the city experienced a period of decline, and Manchester and the surrounding region came under the influence of various Anglo-Saxon and Viking kingdoms, with the Kingdom of Northumbria controlling the area in the late 6th and early 7th centuries. And between the 6th and 10th century, the kingdoms of Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex struggled for control over northwest England. In the year 620, Edwin of Northumbria may have sacked Manchester, and the settlement may have been sacked again in the year 870 by the Danes. And prior to the Norman conquest, the area which is now Manchester and the Lancashire Plain was occupied by the Mercians. And during the 10th century, Manchester experienced significant changes, with Viking invasions causing disruption and chaos. But, with time, the local Anglo-Saxon population assimilated with the Viking settlers. And after that, the Norman conquest in 1066 brought the region under the Norman rule and established the feudal system. And after that, Manchester and its surrounding region were under the control of Roger de Poitou. Listen, just pretend that I didn't butcher the guy's name. Who was a nobleman and a trusted companion of William the Conqueror. Roger then divided the area into fiefdoms and made the Grestall family barons of Manchester, with Albert de Grestall being the first baron of Manchester. And although the Grestall family did not reside in the city, Manchester continued to grow in their absence. Manchester for a period was not under the control of the Greelys, and in 1398 Thomas de Lavar became the Baron of Manchester. In 1421 the church became a collective foundation, dedicated to St. Mary, St. Denis, and St. George. Most of this was spent on converting the Baron's Hall into the house of residence for the colleague priests or the fellows. Thomas also gave the site of the old manor house as a residence for the priests, and by the 16th century the wood trade had made Manchester a flourishing market town. Thomas also gave the site of the old manor as a residence for the priest. It remains as one of the finest examples of a medieval secular religious building in Britain. The collegiate church, which is now the cathedral, was finally completed in 1510, and with the English Reformation, the collegiate church was turned into a Protestant institution. And in this period, Manchester grew heavily due to an influx of settlers, who found Manchester a new weaving industry. And during the Commonwealth period, Manchester underwent significant political and social changes. As England transitioned into a republic under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell, the city of Manchester experienced a shift in governance and religious practices, and the city was granted a seat in the parliament for the first time, with Charles Wolfe as their first MP. However, he did not sit for long, before the parliament was dissolved again, leading to the rule of the major generals, or basically martial law. And after the English Restoration in 1660, Manchester was deprived of its recently granted members of the parliament. No MP to sit for Manchester until 1832. And despite the political setbacks, the town continued to prosper with a number of inhabitants supporting the Glorious Revolution in 1688. And in 1745, Charles Edward Stuart and his army entered Manchester. The town offered no resistance, and the Jacobites obtained enough recruits to form a Manchester regiment. The rebellion aimed to restore the Catholic Stuart monarchy, and Manchester witnessed both support and opposition to the movement. However, they were ultimately defeated, and Charles escaped to France. However, after that, the most important part in Manchester history would start, and it's the Industrial Revolution, since at that point the city was still a small market town. But the textile industry, with its long established presence in Manchester, became a catalyst for change, and the swift adoption of spinning and weaving technologies revolutionized productivity and efficiency. The rise of factories, powered by steam engines, revolutionized production and led to urbanization as migrants flocked to the city in search of employment. And in 1830, Manchester was again at the forefront of the transport technology with the opening of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, the world's first steam passenger railway. This provided a faster transport of raw materials and finished goods between the port of Liverpool and miles of Manchester. And by 1838, Manchester was connected by a railway with Birmingham and London. During the mid-19th century, Manchester grew to become the center of Lancashire cotton industry and was dubbed Cottonopolis. The city had one of the first telephone exchanges in Europe. And in 1879, one was opened on the Falknear Street in the city centre using the bill patent system. And with this growth, neighbouring Liverpool port authorities increased charges and taxes on the city. So, the construction of the Manchester Ship Canal began in 1887. And when it was completed in January 1894, it was the largest river navigation canal in the world and enabled the new port of Manchester to become Britain's third busiest port, despite being about 64 kilometers inland. The 20th century brought both challenges and opportunities to Manchester. In the early 1900s, the city continued to thrive. However, World War I and its aftermath brought economic hardships, with a decline in manufacturing and the loss of lives during the war. And in the post-war period, efforts were made to rebuild and diversify the local economy. And Manchester's industrial landscape gradually shifted, with the traditional industries given away to new sectors. In the Second World War, Manchester played a key role as an industrial manufacturing city, including the Avro Aircraft Factory, now called the BAE system, which built countless aircrafts. And later, Manchester was hit by 2 nights of air raids in December 1940. And as a result of these raids, an estimated 684 people died and more than 2,000 were injured. And after the war, the city saw a wave of reconstruction and redevelopment. And in 1874, Manchester was split from the county of Lancashire and the Metropolitan Borough of Manchester was created. And today, Manchester maintains its reputation as a cultural powerhouse and one of England's most famous cities. Anyways, this is all for today. I am Wonder of You, and I'll see you again in the next video.